Welcome to this deep dive into one of the most significant issues facing everyday Americans today. Before we get started, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments below. And if you find value in this analysis, please hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more content that cuts through the noise. Every night, millions of Americans go to sleep worried about their financial future. They work harder than ever, yet somehow end up with less. Meanwhile, a select group at the top continues to amass unprecedented wealth. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about a fundamental shift in American life, one that's happened largely without most people noticing until it was too late. What we're witnessing isn't simply the natural functioning of a free market economy. It's something else entirely, a deliberate re-engineering of our economic system that has concentrated wealth and power in fewer hands, while hollowing out the middle class that once defined American prosperity. The question is, how did this happen? Who's responsible? And most importantly, was this an accident or was it by design? In the next hour, we'll examine the mechanisms behind this massive transfer of wealth, the players who orchestrated it, and the real-world consequences for families across America. This isn't about politics in the conventional sense, it's about power, who wields it, and how it's being used to reshape society while most people are distracted by manufactured cultural controversies. What you'll discover might shock you. The story doesn't fit neatly into the left-right paradigm we've been conditioned to view everything through. Instead, it reveals a different kind of divide between those who make the rules and those who must live under them. Stay with me, because understanding this is the first step toward reclaiming your future. Think back to the America of a generation ago. A single income could support a family. A high school graduate could find a factory job that paid enough to buy a home, support children, take vacations, and retire with dignity. College was affordable without crippling debt. Healthcare costs wouldn't bankrupt you. This wasn't just for the elite, it was the American standard. What happened? We're told we're wealthier than ever. Look at the stock market. Look at GDP. Look at the amazing technology we have. But if you're like most Americans, your lived experience tells a different story. Your dollars buy less. Your job security has vanished. Your children face bleaker prospects than you did. The metrics that claim to measure our prosperity were measuring something else entirely, the prosperity of those at the very top. The truth is that America has been running on economic fumes, massive debt, artificially low interest rates, and financial engineering that created the illusion of growth while masking fundamental decay. The America you see on your TV screen, the one of boundless opportunity and upward mobility, increasingly exists only for a privileged few, often the same people telling you everything is fine. Meanwhile, the real productive capacity of our nation has been systematically dismantled. Manufacturing jobs weren't just lost, they were deliberately shipped overseas. This wasn't inevitable or necessary. It was a choice made by those who stood to profit enormously from the arrangement, regardless of the consequences for American communities. The most insidious part? They told us this was progress. They called it creative destruction and the global economy. They promised better jobs would replace the ones that left. But for most Americans, those promises never materialized. Instead, we got lower wages, gig work, and an economy increasingly built on consumption rather than production, fueled by debt that many will never escape. Who exactly are they, the people who engineered this transformation? It's not a conspiracy in the shadows. It's happening right in front of us, orchestrated by what we might call an architect class. A network of financial elites, multinational corporate executives, captured regulatory agencies, and the politicians who serve their interests. This architect class doesn't identify primarily with any nation. They're global in outlook and interest. They attend the same conferences in Davos and Aspen, send their children to the same exclusive schools, and move effortlessly between government positions and lucrative private sector roles. Their loyalty isn't to America or its people, it's to a system that rewards them regardless of how it affects everyone else. Look at the revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. Treasury secretaries from Goldman Sachs, defense officials who leave government to join defense contractors, FDA officials who go to work for pharmaceutical companies. This isn't occasional corruption, it's the operating system of our government. These aren't isolated cases but a pattern that reveals who truly holds power. What unites this class isn't political ideology but a shared interest in preserving and expanding their wealth and influence. They may disagree on social issues or pay lip service to different parties, but when it comes to core economic policies that determine how wealth is distributed, they're remarkably aligned. Open borders provide cheap labor. Foreign wars create profit opportunities. Trade policies enable outsourcing. Financial deregulation allows speculation with others' money. The tragedy is that many well-meaning Americans still believe our political divisions are the fundamental problem. They don't see that on the issues that determine their economic future, the leadership of both major parties has largely pursued the same agenda, one that has enriched the few while leaving the many behind. The most important divisions aren't between left and right, but between those who benefit from this system and those who are its victims. How exactly did this massive upward transfer of wealth happen? It wasn't just one policy or decision, but a series of mechanisms working together over decades. Understanding these is crucial to seeing how deliberate this process has been. First, monetary policy. The Federal Reserve has kept interest rates artificially low for most of the past 20 years, fueling asset bubbles in stocks and real estate that primarily benefit those who already own these assets. Meanwhile, ordinary savers earn nothing on their deposits, forcing them into riskier investments just to preserve their wealth. This isn't a side effect, it's the point. It's inflation for the things you own, deflation for the things you make. Second, tax policy. While middle-class tax burdens have remained relatively stable, the effective tax rates on the ultra-wealthy have plummeted. Complex loopholes allow billionaires to pay lower rates than their secretaries. Corporate taxes have been slashed while profits soared. Capital gains, how the rich make most of their money, are taxed at lower rates than actual work. Third, financialization. Our economy increasingly rewards those who move money rather than those who make things. Wall Street extracts enormous rents from the productive economy through complex financial instruments, high-frequency trading, and private equity strategies that load companies with debt, extract their value, and discard them. The people who create nothing take the largest share. Fourth, globalization without protection. Trade deals were structured to maximize corporate profits by accessing cheap foreign labor while providing minimal protection for American workers. The promised benefits of cheaper goods never outweighed the devastating costs to communities built around industries that vanished overnight. Fifth, privatized profits and socialized losses. When risky bets pay off, the gains are private. When they fail catastrophically, as in 2008, taxpayers foot the bill. The architects of the financial crisis weren't just unpunished, many were rewarded with bailouts and bonuses, then brought in to fix the system they broke. These aren't random policies. They're features of a system designed to funnel wealth upward while maintaining just enough economic stability to prevent outright revolt. The American worker has been systematically devalued over the past 50 years. This isn't just about nostalgia for manufacturing jobs. It's about the deliberate choice to prioritize shareholder returns over workers' well-being and the broader health of our society. Consider what's happened to wages. Since 1979, productivity has grown 62%, while typical workers' compensation has increased just 17.5%. Where did the rest of that value go? To executive compensation, shareholder dividends, and stock buybacks. The link between productivity and wages, once a cornerstone of American prosperity, has been deliberately broken. Meanwhile, the power of organized labor has been methodically dismantled. Right-to-work laws, aggressive anti-union tactics, and the threat of outsourcing have crippled workers' ability to negotiate for their fair share. This wasn't inevitable, it was a concerted strategy to shift power from labor to capital. The very concept of job security has been redefined as a liability rather than a virtue. Labor flexibility, the ability to hire and fire at will, is celebrated as efficiency rather than recognized as the destruction of stable communities and families. Benefits once considered standard pensions, healthcare, paid leave, have been whittled away in the name of competitiveness. Perhaps most perniciously, dignity itself has been stripped from work. Essential jobs that keep our society functioning, from eldercare to food service, are treated as low skill and unworthy of living wages. The college degree has been transformed from an opportunity into a requirement, forcing millions into debt for credentials that often don't deliver the promised returns. And when communities protest their economic abandonment, they're told they simply failed to adapt. They should learn to code. They should move. The places they've called home for generations are dismissed as flyover country. Their attachment to their communities is treated as a character flaw rather than a human value worth preserving. This isn't just economic policy. It's a fundamental reimagining of what we owe each other as citizens, and it's left millions of Americans feeling like strangers in their own country. For generations, homeownership was the primary path to wealth building for middle-class Americans. Today, that dream is increasingly out of reach for young people, while those who already own property see their wealth skyrocket. Another engine of inequality that's not accidental but by design. Housing prices in desirable areas have far outpaced wage growth, creating a new landlord class and a generation of permanent renters. In the nation's 20 largest metro areas, home prices have increased 163% since 2000, while wages have grown just 38%. This isn't simply market forces at work, it reflects specific policy choices. Restrictive zoning laws in prosperous areas artificially limit housing supply, driving up prices to benefit existing homeowners at the expense of newcomers. Meanwhile, corporate investors backed by Wall Street money are buying up single-family homes at unprecedented rates, turning them into rental properties and removing them permanently from the ownership market. The 2008 housing crisis, caused by predatory lending and financial engineering, should have led to fundamental reforms. Instead, the biggest banks were bailed out while millions of Americans lost their homes. Even worse, private equity firms swooped in to buy foreclosed properties at bargain prices, converting owner-occupied neighborhoods into rental communities, extracting wealth rather than building it. Low interest rates, intended to stimulate economic growth, have primarily inflated housing values, benefiting those who already own while making entry more difficult for first-time buyers. This monetary policy effectively transfers wealth from the young to the old, from the future to the present. Perhaps most troubling is how housing has been transformed from a place to live into a financial asset class. Communities aren't valued for their social cohesion or quality of life, but for their appreciation potential. This financialization of basic human needs corrupts not just our economy but our understanding of what home means. For millions of Americans, rent now consumes over half their income, trapping them in a cycle where building wealth through property ownership, the traditional American path to financial security, remains perpetually out of reach. And this isn't a natural market outcome. It's the result of deliberate choices that have benefited a small investor class at the expense of everyone else. College education has been transformed from an opportunity into a requirement, and from an investment into a debt trap. This shift represents one of the most effective wealth extraction mechanisms ever devised, one that specifically targets young people at the start of their economic lives. The numbers are staggering. Since 1980, college tuition has increased at nearly 5 times the rate of inflation. The average student now graduates with around $30,000 in debt, with graduate students often carrying 6 figures. Total student loan debt exceeds $1.7 trillion, more than credit cards and auto loans combined. What's behind this explosion? As public funding for higher education was cut, universities didn't tighten their belts. They raised tuition and expanded administrative bloat. The number of administrators has increased 60% faster than the number of faculty. Luxury amenities proliferated to attract students, regardless of educational value. Meanwhile, the federal government stepped in with virtually unlimited student loans, creating a classic third-party payer problem. Universities could charge whatever they wanted because students weren't paying upfront. This wasn't a bug, it was a feature. The system was designed to extract maximum revenue while shifting the cost to young people who had little choice but to participate. The promised return on this investment has failed to materialize for many. A significant percentage of graduates work in jobs that don't require degrees. Starting salaries haven't kept pace with debt burdens. Yet the system is virtually risk-free for the universities and lenders, as student debt can't be discharged in bankruptcy, a protection not even credit card companies enjoy. Most perversely, as educational credentials have become more necessary, they've simultaneously become less meaningful. Degree inflation requires increasingly advanced credentials for jobs that once required less education. This creates a perpetual treadmill that benefits the education industry while leaving students with diminishing returns on their investment. The result is a generation delayed in homeownership, family formation, and retirement saving, not because they made poor choices, but because they followed exactly the path they were told would lead to success. They did everything right, yet find themselves starting their adult lives underwater, their future earnings effectively mortgaged to pay for credentials whose value was systematically overstated. Healthcare in America has been transformed from a service into a wealth extraction industry that now consumes nearly 20% of our GDP, far more than any other developed nation, with worse outcomes. This isn't just inefficiency, it's a deliberate system designed to maximize profit at the expense of patients. Consider the basics. Americans pay more for prescription drugs than citizens of any other country, often multiples more for identical medications. Hospital charges have no relationship to actual costs, with prices that are both exorbitant and entirely opaque until after services are rendered. Administrative costs consume about 34% of healthcare expenditures, money that goes not to care but to paperwork, marketing, and profit. Insurance premiums have risen 55% in the last decade alone, while deductibles have more than doubled. This means Americans are paying more for coverage that covers less. Medical debt is now the leading cause of bankruptcy in America, a phenomenon virtually unknown in other advanced economies, where healthcare is considered a right rather than a profit center. How did we get here? The answer lies in a system where every incentive is misaligned. Pharmaceutical companies spend more on marketing than research. Hospitals merge to gain pricing power, not to improve care. Insurance companies profit by denying claims. Medical device manufacturers charge whatever the market will bear for essential equipment. The scale of the extraction is staggering. The CEOs of major healthcare companies routinely earn 8-figure compensation packages. Private equity firms have moved aggressively into healthcare, applying the same ruthless profit maximization strategies used in other industries to services that literally determine whether people live or die. Perhaps most perversely, the system's complexity serves as its own defense. Few patients can navigate the Byzantine pricing structures, coverage limitations, and network restrictions, complexity that exists not by accident but by design, to obscure the true costs and prevent meaningful comparison shopping. This isn't healthcare, it's a sophisticated wealth transfer mechanism disguised as a care delivery system. And the victims aren't just the sick and vulnerable, but every American forced to participate in a system that prioritizes profit over health and financial extraction over human well-being. The rise of tech giants represents an unprecedented concentration of power in our economy and our lives. Far from being simply innovative companies delivering services people want, they've created a new form of surveillance capitalism that extracts value from our most personal data while reshaping society in profound and troubling ways. These companies aren't just dominant, they're monopolistic. Google controls over 90% of search. Facebook, now Meta, controls social media. Amazon dominates e-commerce and cloud computing. Apple gatekeeps mobile access. Microsoft owns enterprise computing. Together, they've created choke points through which enormous portions of our economic and social lives must pass, and they extract rent at every opportunity. Their business model is fundamentally extractive. You're not the customer, you're the product. Everything you do online, every search, click, purchase, message, and movement is tracked, recorded, analyzed, and monetized. This surveillance extends far beyond their platforms, following you across the internet and increasingly into the physical world through connected devices. The data they collect isn't just used to sell ads. It powers algorithms that shape what information you see, what products you're offered, and increasingly what opportunities you receive. These systems create filter bubbles that reinforce existing beliefs and fragment our common reality. They amplify outrage because anger drives engagement, which drives profit regardless of the social cost. Perhaps most troublingly, these companies have become the arbiters of permissible speech. Decisions about what content to allow, promote, or suppress are made by unelected tech executives answerable only to shareholders. This represents an extraordinary concentration of power with minimal accountability, transparency, or democratic input. Meanwhile, these same companies have perfected tax avoidance on a global scale. They use complex structures to shift profits to low-tax jurisdictions while benefiting from the infrastructure, education systems, and legal protections paid for by the very taxpayers they avoid. They've effectively opted out of the social contract while maintaining unprecedented influence over society. The tech giants aren't just successful businesses. They represent a new form of power that operates above and beyond democratic control. And their dominance has generated fabulous wealth for a small tech elite while the rest of the economy stagnates, another mechanism through which the many have been impoverished to enrich the few. Perhaps the most devastating consequence of this rigged system is the collapse of trust in our institutions. Americans increasingly believe, with good reason, that the system is designed to work against them. This erosion of trust isn't just a social problem, it's an existential threat to our continued functioning as a society. The numbers tell the story. In 1964, 77% of Americans trusted the government to do the right thing most of the time. Today, that figure hovers around 20%. Trust in media, corporations, universities, and even churches has similarly plummeted. This isn't cynicism. It's a rational response to institutions that have repeatedly betrayed public trust. Americans watched as officials promised that free trade would bring prosperity for all, only to see their communities hollowed out while profits soared. They saw financial executives who crashed the economy walk away with bonuses while millions lost their homes. They witnessed a pandemic response that protected asset values first and human lives second. They've seen wars fought for reasons that proved false, at enormous cost in lives and treasure. The architect class treats this collapse in trust as a communications problem rather than a legitimacy crisis. They blame disinformation rather than examining how their own actions have destroyed their credibility. They label skepticism as extremism rather than recognizing it as the natural consequence of repeatedly broken promises. This trust deficit has real consequences. It makes solving collective problems nearly impossible. It drives people to seek security in tribal identities rather than common institutions. It creates fertile ground for conspiracy theories, because when the official explanations have so often proven false, alternative narratives gain credibility regardless of evidence. Most dangerously, it undermines the social contract itself. Democratic governance depends on the governed believing the system works for them, however imperfectly. When that belief collapses, democracy itself is at risk. We're witnessing not just political polarization, but a more fundamental question. Can we continue to function as one society when trust in our common institutions has been so thoroughly destroyed? This collapse didn't just happen. It was earned through decades of betrayal by those entrusted with power. Rebuilding that trust will require not just better communication, but fundamental reform of the systems that have been weaponized against ordinary Americans. I've painted a stark picture of the forces aligned against everyday Americans. But this isn't a counsel of despair. It's a call to clarity. Understanding how the system has been rigged against you is the first step toward reclaiming your future and your country. The good news is that despite their power, the architect class is vulnerable. Their system depends on complexity, distraction, and the illusion that there are no alternatives. Once enough people see through these mechanisms, their power begins to erode. Truth is contagious, and clarity is the precondition for meaningful change. What can you do? Start by rejecting the artificial divisions they use to keep you distracted. The real divide in America isn't between left and right, but between those who produce value and those who extract it. It's between those who are rooted in communities and those who profit from dismantling them. Find common cause with your fellow Americans based on these real interests rather than manufactured culture wars. Protect yourself financially, minimize debt, build skills that can't be easily outsourced or automated. Create value directly rather than depending on intermediaries. Build relationships in your community. Real human connections are the foundation of resilience in turbulent times. Reclaim your attention. The outrage industrial complex exists to keep you angry, afraid, and divided. Turn it off. Seek information that helps you understand systems rather than inflaming emotions. Look for voices that explain rather than merely enrage. Most importantly, recognize that while the problem is systemic, change begins locally. Rebuilding America starts in your community, with concrete actions to protect what matters and build alternatives to failing institutions. National renewal will come not from the top down, but from the bottom up, as Americans reclaim agency over their economic and political destiny. Remember, those in power want you to believe that resistance is futile, that the forces aligned against you are too powerful to overcome. This is a lie. Throughout our history, Americans have faced and defeated more formidable challenges. We've overcome entrenched interests and corrupt systems before. The path forward begins with the recognition that we can do so again. The system was designed by people to serve specific interests. It can be redesigned by people to serve different interests, yours. That redesign begins today with you. Let's get to work.